So, I don't know like the first sentences should be. It's like the first sentence I feel like is very critical. Anyway, welcome to the POFcast. This is the second POFcast, actually. We had the first one was more of a ad hoc one for the women's program, which Minagano, you were part of, and which we'll probably come back to in today's conversation. And now we wanted to launch the POFcast, and hopefully we'll continue into 2025 in a more regular fashion. So before we get into reviewing what's happened in 2024, let's introduce ourselves for whoever's listening to this first POFcast.
Yeah, sure. My name is David Noel Vincent, part of the POF team.
And my name is Minagano Kape. I'm part of the POF team.
And I'm Rob Lancaster, also strangely part of the POF team. As things evolve, we'll see who else we can get to join us in conversation over the course of the program. But let's talk for now about POF and what we've been up to in 2024. So what's happened? Let's give a flavour of some of the things that have been happening over the course of this year.
Actually, before we get into what has happened, I wanted to attribute the POFcast name, how it came about. Attributing it to Alfred, that's our colleague, actually now former colleague, when we were trying to think what is the coolest name, and then he came out with the POFcast.
Former colleague because he moved on to greener pastures, not because after coming up with such a genius name, I think he reached the high water point of his involvement. So yeah, very apt. So off the back of that, what are some of the things that come to mind when you think of 2024 and what we've been working on?
For me, I was just trying to think about it earlier on, and I thought, gosh, we did some stuff, or maybe not, because I was trying to recall. But I think we've done a range of stuff. Like we had some women and youth meeting that took place in Akobo. We called it ICGS, Inter-Communal Governance Structures, meeting that took place. I can remember that.
Yes, and I can remember the launch of the Peace Circles, which now has evolved into Bridges of Peace, a program that is focusing on women from Jonglei State and Lake State, trying to see how women can be part of peace building in their communities. So this is what stood out for me, and we're still progressing with that. And the Weideng Conference that focuses on the discussions on customary law or the law noir.
Just say a bit about Weideng and the significance of Weideng and where that is and why we were having a conference in Weideng.
So Weideng is a village that is considered by the Nuer community, both the Law and the Gawar, as a space that have a spiritual significance, because this is where Prophet Mundeng have lived and come from. So the Weideng Conference was to discuss the Nuer customary law, especially on compensation. So the Nuer community have sets of laws that guides them on compensation, but also on other things. But over the years, different sections of the Nuer community have different laws on compensation, and they feel like that is contributing negatively in terms of maintaining peace and cohesion within their society. So the communities have reached out to POF and asked if they can be supported to have a conversation on how they can harmonize the customary law on compensation so that Nuer from different parts of the Nuer land can have a law that applies to all of them, and that way they can be able to address grievances that comes into the community in a more peaceful way and in a way that is accepted by the communities.
And who from our team went this time? Was it you?
Yeah, the last Saturday.
So I'm interested, what was your impression of Weideng as a place? Because I was at the conference 2 years ago, or a bit more than 2 years ago, and had a certain impression. But what was your impression?
There is, of course, I've read a lot about Mundeng and I've heard a lot about Weideng. So I was, when we landed and then drove there, we drove from Motor. So there's something about it that I felt that, so as soon as we arrived, then the relatives around came in and they took us there. And as a way of paying respect, we had to go to the shrine, which is, of course, by now, it's destroyed. So we went around, we just walk around it, and then the elders took us through a journey. And immediately I felt, okay, this place, there's something about it. Because the sense, and it was quite incredible.
I had exactly the same sort of impression going there 2.5 years ago. Everyone had talked about it, and I was like, the BA, the town thing, I was like, how impressive can that really be? Particularly as it was destroyed however long ago, 90 years ago, 100 years ago now. But yeah, somehow when you arrive, it has an atmosphere or an energy around it, which is conducive to these kind of conversations.
It's interesting. I think I have an image of Weideng. I haven't gone to the conference, but like the way you describe it when we were walking on the concept, it sounded so interesting. So I had a particular image. And then when David, you came back with our other colleague who's not here, Robert, like you also spoke very highly of that place and the feeling that comes with it. I became curious and did a little bit of research, and I was able to see the previous structure that was destroyed. And it was really, really impressive, the shrine. Yeah, it was impressive to see. So I think I look forward to being able to go to Weideng to see the space.
Problem is we've now prejudiced your impressions, so it'd still be interesting to
this
see how
space in my wine to have my own experience about that, but I'm just looking forward.
So then coming back to what you mentioned at the beginning about the ICGS, probably good if we can give people a bit of context as to ICGS, which has become something that rolls off our tongue, but probably to most people is not an accessible acronym or concept. So what's going on with the ICGS?
So as I said, this came at the back of the peace agreement that brought the law Nuer, the Greater Singapore, and then also the Mudle together. So at the back of that, there was a set of resolutions that would guide the implementation of peace. And one key aspect of it in particular was looking at the accountability, justice and accountability. And in order to do that, there was an agreement that the three communities would form like a leadership group that will probably just oversee the implementation. And that Inter-Communal Governance Structures was formed. And basically we look at the three key structures, the youth, the women, and the chiefs. But subsequently, sort of built into that, the commissioners were involved with it. So they meet now every 3 months to sort of review or check each other what had happened. And then a lot of conversations derived around that. But if I could remember, I think initially the idea was to set it up as an just accountability, right? Where if any community has violated the peace agreement, that is the platform where they could question each other. I can say that we didn't really go down that line, but at least it has created a platform where the communities can just keep chatting each other, talking about what had happened, what has not happened, and why. So yeah, it was quite good.
Yeah, it kind of keeps an engagement with the leadership, and it's not just any leadership, right? It's the actual armed youth leadership. When in the youth structure, it's the actual traditional chiefs in that structure, and the women leaders who are elected actually in their communities for the most part. So yeah, accountability we can perhaps come back to when we talk about challenges that we've faced.
But what it has really created, which I see over the years, is the camaraderie, the friendship that has been built that helps actually build the trust between the community. For example, if during particular ICGS and a particular member doesn't show up, then they start questioning why is this person wasn't there, because they have formed this sort of a small group and they're actually taking it serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, to that point of trust, I think the Kobo ICGS was my very first of the ICGS.
That was in April, right?
In April, yeah. That was around, March, April, around that time. And it was very interesting to see these communities coming together. And on the point of trust, some of the communities don't speak the same language, but sometimes you see the youth from Murle and Nuer laughing at we were just there baffling. We were like, how are they communicating? What are they laughing about? It was quite interesting, but also the fact that it's telling the communities that dialogue is an option, because when they come to the ICGs, usually they were very bitter. They have a lot of grievances. But some of them were just waiting for the ICGS forum to be able to speak up their mind, to be able to express their grievances with the other community, so that the idea that it's possible to solve problems through dialogue, I think it's gaining support within the communities, which is a very positive thing.
Yeah, I can kind of identify with that at some level. I mean, the consequences in the communities, if there's a mass mobilization, are huge. But I sometimes think about, when I'm having email back and forth and someone's winding me up, or I perceive that they're winding me up. If I never had a chance to meet them in person, it would just escalate and escalate. And then you meet them in person, and they're not actually so bad. And hopefully they feel the same way about me. Who knows? But yeah, that space to bring people together. Well, that links with one of my things that sticks in mind from this year was the interim meeting we had in Juba, and because we'd had this issue in Ayod and then a little bit in Akobo around the rains and the logistical challenges if we don't have these meetings fully in the dry season, where there's no prospect of having charter flights cancelled because there's been rain and so forth. So having this interim meeting, which wasn't an official meeting, and then taking the time to really look at what could have been improved from the previous meetings, and particularly around that pre-engagement question. How do we have a more rigorous process leading into it, so we're not rehashing the same conversations? Because these resentments build up, and if they don't have that outlet in advance of the meeting, then it becomes the preoccupation of the meeting. And then when you've got it in 3 languages and have it which is a occupational hazard, takes forever. So some of those processes around that Juba interim meeting, where we're able to get to a little more focused point and leverage that trust you'd spoken about, where you bring the youth into one conversation about how to move this forward, and they come up with a solution.
And I think I wasn't there because I was away at the time, but I think it's been referenced a lot by the team and also some of the participants on how it was actually facilitated and the conversation around that. I think I'm not quite sure what happened, but I think there was really a space for them to have conversation, and it was more like a planning conversation, which was great.
Yeah, what I like about the whole process is the fact that we really wanted to try to focus the conversation, because they're able to talk about the things that are not going well, the things that they're disappointed about, but then we question them to think about one thing or two things that the other community have done well, that they appreciated.
That's really...
So also, I think that has also helped to neutralize the ground for the meeting in Juba, in a way that they were not only thinking about the negative, they're able to look for things that they have appreciated about the efforts that are being done by the other community, which sometimes it's very difficult in a dialogue to move the participants or the delegates into that angle of thinking. Sometimes people just focus on the negative. It can take a day or even more just complaining and talking about the negative and forgetting about all the other good things that have happened. So that was really interesting.
And then just building on that, that last step of what questions do you have for each of the other communities, which kind of still gives the space to interrogate in a way, but is coming at it a little less aggressively than making judgments straight off the bat about the other communities, which is often what these have become, right? It would start with speeches about everything that the other community had done wrong, rather than explain to us why ... Yeah. And some of those questions, in a way, strangely, were sort of interpreted humorously too. It brought a lightness to the conversation, even though they were quite probing conversations, because it's like, they've realized we're doing it, and how can we respond?
Yeah. Obviously, we had some other activities that we did, focusing on the ICGS. But of course, we had the Duke and the Twic East conference in particular. That wasn't planned, but of course, it at the back of that, the tension grew, and then unfortunately, the two communities clashed, which led to the government calling and said, look, we need partners to intervene. And I think that the intervention was done immediately. But I think the Jonglei state government, the current governor, I think he did really well. Before even calling the partners, he was able to mobilize the military and send them down to where they were fighting. And then at the back of that, the elites were brought together, elites from the two communities, and then some of the community representatives at the grassroots level in board. The significance of that was just really to pull and roll together before now it's sort of going back to engage the grassroots. So it ended with the committee that was formed that has to go to Duke and has to go to Twic East to sort of disseminate the outcome of the board. So that was a good one.
One of the things that's underway is this whole so-called Nanaam establishment. Do you want to elaborate on what that's all about?
Well, so this is a conversation that has been going on for quite some time, the establishment of Nanaam, how partners can establish a permanent presence in the areas of Nanaam that is in Greater GPA. These are areas usually where the youth could gather to mobilize to go for raids, and it is quite far from the presence of the authorities, the local authorities. So in our discussions, we felt like this is an area where partners need to really rigorously engage the communities. And I think finally, sometimes this year we are able to start the process. And I think we have a team on ground from the RSRTF partners who are working to see to it that the Nanaam permanent presence is made a reality. And I think there is a good level of government support from the GPA government to ensure that Nanaam is established. And recently, I think there has been a confirmation of a go-ahead for the establishment of the airstrip by the chief administrator of Greater Bibor Administrative Area, which is a very positive step towards the realization of the Nanaam establishment. I think there's a lot of excitement from the partners, but also from the communities and the local government to see to it that these areas where they're not able to penetrate, there is permanent presence, and then we can be able to now bring, because this is a border area that brings together the Nuer, the Dinka, and the Murle. So this is why we can be able to now bring the communities closer and see if there are ways that they can work together. And one of the things that is part of the Nanaam establishment plan is to see how we can bring youth from the Murle to come and help set up structures in this area, so that
the youth from Law.
From Law Nuer, yeah. How we can bring youth from Law Nuer to the Nanaam areas to set up structures. So this is one way of also helping to build trust among the communities. So I think basically I am looking forward to see how the project or this intervention will go on. And
I think one thing I like about this, Rob, the late Dr. John Garang has this massive phrase that says taking a town to the villages. So so this Nanaam thing is, we are doing exactly that. Instead of bringing the whole Nanaam community to Pibor as a town, or Bumurub or Likwangwe, it's about getting out there and try to establish a town or establish a place where you have services. So that's quite an incredible dream. And I think connecting to this, over the years, while engaging with the three communities, there's always, especially the Greater Bor team, youth, and then the law, they keep saying whatever the Murle needs, they recognize that they still underdeveloped. So give it to them. And so this vision came out of it. And we have the two villages now, Uno on the Likwangwe side, and Gumruk, Dishibit on the Gumruk side. That this sort of establishment going to have the two areas where we have like the humanitarian hub, and then we'll have the police post that will be established, plus the Payable administrator sort of administration, and then also the airstrip, as Minagano has mentioned. And hopefully out of that, things could start to emerge. The place that we used to call a hard to reach or a hotspot, then we're beginning to see some choppers landing there, and that would be very significant.
Yeah. And I think the airstrip is meant to be for fixed wing.
For a fixed wing, yeah, so it's not...
And then it's going to be manually...
yes, I have actually installed a commission from the aviation now.
All right.
Yeah, the Sudan aviation to go ahead.
And what you're saying about the town to the village in a way is also going against a lot of the thinking that kind of assumes that development everywhere will be an urbanizing process and so forth. And what this means for really exploring what development looks like across that area, but also particularly in that Nanaam area and what they're interested in and
exactly
how to deliver services, as well as enabling whatever indigenous kind of pathways.
Yeah.
And in some of the conversation with the youth, usually in Murle would say, we don't have services. Everything is very far away from us. And what can we do? That's why we go to raid. I mean, sometimes you will question the sense behind it, but I think it's something worth trying to see if they can be able to tap into the different services that will come to them as a result of the establishment of Nanaam.
I'm looking at this vision, grand opening of Wuno and DB area, where we have the governors coming in and I hope the RSRC's donors actually can brave it to learn in those two areas and have a grand opening. That will be incredible.
And any other donors.
Or be anyway, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So we've spoken a lot about that side of Jonglei and GPAA. And of course, we're across in Lakes and somehow connecting with Warrap through Peace Canal, who we partner with. So what's been going on that side? What are the key points from 2024?
I think just to kick it off, I think the start of the conversation between the Pakam and the Luanyjang in that corridor, the relationship has always been a bit tricky. And so over time, even looking at the POF programming, that area was quite tricky because we sort of operate from Pakam side, Rumbek North, and then all of a sudden we see that the cross-border issues are creeping in and is causing it destabilize whatever that we're establishing. So it's quite so in coordination with the Concord's program in Warrap, RSRCA program, the conversation sort of kicked off then and say, okay, they also recognize the importance of having a cross-border relationship. And so the pre-dialogues were conducted with the youth, the women and the chiefs in the two areas, looking at what are some of these issues and how we can bring the community together. And unfortunately, the main conference was meant to be done a few months ago, but it kept delayed just simply because the Warrap government, of course, we had some changes that has been happening. But finally, we have the governor now. And just a couple of days ago, the two governors met, and now they're pushing this forward. And hopefully in December, before Christmas, the two communities will come. And as we speak, obviously, there's a lot of tension between the two communities of Lake. But I think this conference will be able to bring them together and have some conversation, which is, it will be great. And that's sort of that border. And it won't just be Pakam-Luanyjang. We're also bringing in the Ulba, what is it called? There is the Tons South, right?
Is it Jalwao?
Jalwao, yes. They will be part of the conversation as well.
So it's been something evolving for some time, and the awareness of that need, which speaks also to what can be the challenges of trying to deal with issues across administrative borders as well. Not because of anyone's ill will, but just because you're then having to navigate and align scheduling and priorities and things come up all the time. So once you get in one state all ready to go, then something comes up here, which means it's more difficult to stick to the original schedule. But seems like, fingers crossed, we're getting there in the next month or so.
Yeah, another interesting thing that has been happening in the lake site is the cattle migration dialogue. And I think this is a program that we've been supporting for the last 4 years.
Yes.
Working with the communities to see how they can together come and agree on the migration routes for the cattle during dry season. And I think that has helped a lot in reducing violence during the movement of cattle season. And I see a lot of potential lessons that can be learned and applied in other parts of the country where cattle move, especially between Jonglei State and Central Equatoria. We have seen a lot of incidences where the communities get to fight, or sometimes the crops of the farmers are destroyed. And so it's creating a lot of tension across different states. But I think we can learn a lot of lessons on how cattle can still move to places where they are pastures during rainy season, without getting into conflict with the host
competition of other resources.
Exactly, or in the communities where they're passing through. So I find that interesting. And the final annual cattle migration conference will happen in December. So we just finished the pre-dialogues, which will now culminate into the annual cattle migration.
Actually, we have the dates for that. So it's 10 to the 12, which is great. And the governor of Lake State has promised to be there, which is also another, which shows the significance of it, really, that he wants to. From the report we saw, the Greater Rumbek team had a meeting with him and also the Minister of Peace Building, and he literally sort of acknowledged that I really want to be there to sort of reaffirm and the commitment for peace.
And sustainability has been a question that we've been asking internally. So I'm really looking forward to how the conversation will be and how the communities will also embrace the idea of now them taking lead and being the one taking the process forward. Yeah.
This engagement and these questions that relate to cattle, that's emerging as more and more of a theme in some of our engagements. And one thing we haven't talked about is the Livelihoods Lab of POF and some of the initial pilots that we worked on in 2024. I think we'll probably give a whole POFcast episode to explore some of that. But can we touch briefly on just the high-level headings of what's being worked on in the Livelihoods Lab?
So when we look at the trial with the cattle trade or forming the cattle trade association in rural as a pilot. And I think that first sets of activities, I think it was very promising in that has happened on that side. So now it's looking at having that to expand. And in particular, the Cattle Kemam youth are quite thrilled, and everybody wants it now to happen in their area, where we basically look at empowering these youth to become self-reliant. So when they raid each other, it's because they want cattle. So this is a direct answer to them that they can easily do business with cattle around in their own communities and with the neighboring communities. And I think the success of the Uror pilot was quite incredible. And as you said, we can go into deeper. But what is emerging is that the need is really high, or the interest is very high, which is awesome.
And it affirms this idea that our colleague Chol Gao had really been pushing around how communities take seriously cattle in a way that perhaps don't in relation to cash investments and so forth, and drawing that parallel with the way they treat cattle as opposed to milk, right? And they just sort of dish out the milk and whatever, but the cattle are taken really seriously, and it seems that that's what we're seeing in the way it's panning out. But yeah, we'll come back to that in more detail in a separate.
So we have the teas farm in Lake State. I think it's been quite interesting, bringing together a group of women to work on a farm. And I think through the Peace Farm, they're able to produce and sell some of their products to the market. And I mean, they continue to provide. It's helping them to provide for their families with food, but also to make money out of it. And what is very interesting about the Peace Farm, it's bringing together women from different sections of the community within the Dinka that community. So I think that fosters some sort of unity and collaboration and peace among the communities that have history of fighting among themselves.
And the final thing on the Livelihood Labs is the Village Saving and Loan Association, the VSLA, which also kicked them quite well in Lakes. So yeah.
So to be continued on the Livelihoods Lab front. So that probably covers, there's been more, but that covers some of the key points of highlights of the year from what we've worked on. What's interesting to explore is then what the challenges have been, and the lessons that we're taking into year 2 and what the horizon looks like there, which we'll come back to in part 2 of the year in review.
Yeah.
But if you're interested in reading more, people are interested in reading more about any of these activities, or most of them, I think, are captured in some way, either on POF's blog or Peace Canal's blog. So that's pofss.org/blog or peacecanal.org/blog. So we'll be back for part 2.